The German sergeant lifted his wrist toward his face, checking the time out of habit rather than urgency. The morning outside Saint-Lô was quiet enough to feel unreal. His men were crouched in shallow foxholes, chewing on cold rations, trading tired jokes, listening to insects hum in the hedgerows. Then, in the space of a single breath, the world ended. There was no whistle, no warning thunder, no gradual rise of sound. The ground exploded everywhere at once. Hundreds of shells struck simultaneously, tearing the earth apart in a perfect circle of destruction. Soldiers vanished where they stood. Trucks lifted off the ground and slammed back down like toys. The pressure wave alone knocked men unconscious dozens of meters from the nearest impact. For those who survived, the silence beforehand was the most terrifying part. They had not been attacked. They had been erased. What those German soldiers experienced was not luck or coincidence. It was the result of a decade of deliberate planning, a method of war designed to remove warning, remove hope, and remove the chance to survive. To understand why American artillery became the most feared weapon on the Western Front, you have to understand how it was built long before the first shell landed. The story begins far from Europe, far from the war, in a place where the wind never seemed to stop blowing. In Oklahoma, at Fort Sill, American artillery officers spent the years between the world wars quietly rethinking everything. They knew, while much of the military clung to traditions from the previous conflict, a small group of officers asked an uncomfortable question. Why were soldiers still being given time to react to incoming fire? Traditional artillery followed a predictable pattern. A few shells were fired first. Observers watched where they landed. Corrections were made. Then the real bombardment began. This process took minutes, sometimes longer. Those minutes meant survival. Soldiers learned to recognize the first impacts as a signal to run, dive, flatten themselves against the earth. Studies conducted by the U.S. Army revealed a brutal truth. At the instant the first shell landed, most soldiers were still standing. 2 seconds later, many were already prone. 8 seconds later, almost everyone had found cover. Those seconds reduced casualties by more than half. So American planners asked a radical question. What if there were no seconds at all? Major Carlos Brewer was among the first to challenge existing doctrine. He believed artillery should not operate as isolated batteries working independently. He envisioned a system where calculation, coordination, and timing replaced guesswork and adjustment. His ideas were refined by officers who followed him, including Major Orlando Ward, who helped formalize what became known as centralized fire control. The concept was simple in theory and ruthless in execution. Instead of each battery calculating its own firing solution, a central command would compute everything. Every gun, regardless of distance, would fire at a specific moment so that all shells arrived. Together, heavy guns far away fired first. Lighter guns closer to the target fired later. When done correctly, hundreds of shells landed within seconds of each other. No ranging shots, no warning. Just impact. The mathematics were unforgiving. Each gun had a different barrel length, shell weight, propellant charge, and distance to target. Flight times varied wildly. Some shells stayed in the air for over a minute. Others arrived in less than half the time. Every calculation had to be exact. Fire direction centers used slide rules, firing tables, and synchronized time signals to coordinate entire sectors of artillery. When the countdown reached 0, the target heard nothing until the ground tore itself apart. German soldiers were trained professionals. They understood ballistics. They understood artillery. What they could not understand was speed. German artillery doctrine relied on decentralized control and wired communications. Forward observers used field telephones that were frequently destroyed by shell fire. Calculations were done locally, often under pressure. A sudden threat could take 10 minutes or more to respond to. American artillery could respond in under 3 minutes. This difference became painfully clear in North Africa. During the fighting in Tunisia in early 1943, German forces encountered American units that were inexperienced and sometimes disorganized. Infantry made mistakes. Units broke under pressure. But the artillery did not. German advances were repeatedly halted by sudden, accurate barrages that arrived faster than expected. Veteran German soldiers noticed immediately. The coordination was different. The response was faster. The silence before impact was unnatural. As American forces moved into Italy and then France, the system matured. Radios replaced wires. Forward observers rode with infantry. Units, calling in fire while under attack. Spotter aircraft orbited overhead. Relaying real-time adjustments. Artillery became an extension of the infantry rather than a distant support arm. By the summer of 1944, the system had reached its most lethal form. The hedgerows of Normandy were a defender's dream. Thick earthen banks topped with dense vegetation divided fields into natural fortresses. Tanks struggled to break through. Infantry assaults stalled. Progress was measured in meters and blood. But American artillery adapted. Forward observers learned to target positions they could not see. Air observers marked enemy movement hidden by foliage. Fire direction centers coordinated dozens of batteries across entire divisions. German units found that positions considered safe were suddenly obliterated. Rear areas were no longer safe. Supply routes were no longer safe. Even rest periods were shattered by sudden, synchronized barrages. At Hill 192 near Saint-Lô, German defenders had repelled repeated assaults. American artillery commanders changed the approach. Instead of a single overwhelming bombardment, they executed repeated time-on-target missions throughout the night, every few hours. German positions erupted without warning. Sleep became impossible. Reinforcements were cut off. By morning, resistance collapsed. The battlefield was not won by infantry charges alone, but by exhaustion and terror delivered from afar. Then came July 25, 1944. Operation Cobra was designed to break the stalemate in Normandy. The plan concentrated overwhelming force on a narrow front. Thousands of bombers struck first, tearing open the German defenses. When the aircraft passed, artillery took over. More than 1,000 guns fired in coordinated waves. Entire German formations ceased to function as fighting units. Veteran troops who had survived the Eastern Front were psychologically destroyed. Survivors shook uncontrollably. Men were found unable to speak or hold weapons. It was not just destruction. It was helplessness. There was nothing to shoot at, nothing to charge, nothing to escape. As American armor poured through the breach, artillery moved with them. Batteries leapfrogged forward, setting up and firing within minutes. German units attempting to establish defensive lines discovered shells arriving before trenches were dug. The guns seemed omnipresent. By late summer, German forces in France were in full retreat. Entire divisions were encircled and destroyed under converging fire. Stories spread among survivors. American shells came without warning. Silence meant death. Then winter came. In December 1944, Germany launched its final gamble in the Ardennes. Surprise attacks shattered thinly held American lines. Snow, fog, and forests concealed advancing armor. But once again, artillery held. This time, the Americans unveiled a closely guarded secret: proximity fuses. Unlike traditional shells that exploded on impact, these detonated in midair when they sensed the ground below. Bursts occurred above trenches and foxholes, raining fragments downward. Cover that once saved lives became death traps. Combined with time-on-target tactics, the effect was devastating. German attacks stalled under relentless fire. Entire formations were cut apart in open ground. In some sectors, coordinated artillery commands brought hundreds of guns under single control, firing thousands of rounds in hours. Survivors reported the same fear. Not the cold, not tanks, the airbursts. By the time American forces crossed into Germany in 1945, artillery had reached an unprecedented scale. At the Rhine, thousands of guns fired simultaneously, delivering tens of thousands of shells. In a single hour, defenses disappeared, Infantry crossed unopposed. The war ended soon after. The men who created this system never became famous. They fought with calculations, timing, and coordination long before combat began. Their goal was not glory. It was efficiency, fewer American dead, faster victories, overwhelming force delivered without warning. For the soldiers who faced it, the memory never faded, the silence, the instant destruction, the knowledge that nothing they did could save them. For them, hell had a sound, and it was American artillery.